Hello, my name's Christopher Anatra. You know me as the Quantum Businessman. Welcome to this series of videos I've titled Symphony of Realities. Each of these videos or acts are interconnected like a symphony to help you understand how reality and your consciousness work within our holographic universe. Ladies and gentlemen of the court, this brings us to our fourth dark truth. Solar activity of the white sun and timeline residue make up our fourth dark truth. What do I mean? Did you know that on some timelines, everyone on the Titanic survived? Do I have any proof for that? Actually, I do. Because when you have a hairball of timelines, you usually can find what those in the Mandela effect community call residue. What is residue? Residue is defined as a small amount of something that remains after the main part has gone or been taken or used. Related to timelines and Mandela effects, it is the physical proof of a collapsed or merged timeline.
It's newsreel film.
Yeah, I see that.
It shows us winning the war.
But we didn't win the war.
That's what they told us.
Jesus, I know what this is.
What?
The man in the high castle.
Who?
Some guy Ed told me about. He makes these anti-fascist movies.
Makes them GIs in Times Square.
No, I know they look real.
Yeah, they look real because they are real.
And now, another drum roll as I provide you with important residue. Ladies and gentlemen of the court, I now offer the following newspaper headlines. These are authentic and nothing is photoshopped here. All Titanic passengers are safe and transferred in lifeboats at sea. Disabled ship under tow after hitting big iceberg. The first paragraph of the Halifax, Nova Scotia story of April 15th states, held afloat only by her waterproof compartments, the great white starliner Titanic is slowly crawling towards this harbor. The Oswego Daily Times reported, the Titanic was not only afloat, but that her engines were working. A wireless message went out stating, all Titanic's passengers safe. Let's pause here and engage our critical thinking. Was this bad reporting? Simple misinformation? Unreliable telegraph technology? Or residue as the result of a hairball of timelines? Some in the Mandela effect community have discovered these headlines and wondered if we're heading into a timeline where the Titanic never sank, as these authentic newspaper headlines were found. As I mentioned, there were future negative timelines that would manifest if everyone survived. If you view the timelines of the Titanic as a chess game, both sides agreed the ship must go down. In essence, both Agent Smith and Neo from the Matrix movies are on the same side. The solution was to find the Goldilocks zone between those who lived and died for the best timeline potential for humanity. I'll give you two specific examples. The first is about the Hindenburg disaster. The Hindenburg disaster occurred on May 6, 1937 in New Jersey. The German passenger airship mysteriously caught fire and was destroyed during its attempt to dock. What caused the Hindenburg to catch on fire? St. Elmo's fire, a glowing ball of plasma created by a corona discharge. Now, in my old timeline, there were 0 survivors of the Hindenburg. It was one of the worst disasters in aviation history, with over 130 people killed. However, in this timeline, there were 97 people on board and 62 survived. The Hindenburg is approaching a Goldilocks zone related to survivors. So not only were there about 30 less people on board, we now have a Mandela effect where 2/3 survived. Is this a Mandela effect for you also? The Hindenburg had just previously been all over the world. It was in Brazil, then it went to Frankfurt, Germany, then it headed to New Jersey. It was a comfortable and reliable way to travel, and it produced almost zero emissions. But when it was suspiciously struck by St. Elmo's fire and burned in front of the public with camera crews filming the landing and then fiery destruction, it ended the era of an airship. I'm going to reveal something about St. Elmo's fire, which is super fascinating. So let's cue the percussion. Wait, were those cymbals? Wherever there is St. Elmo's fire, time travel is usually involved. It was observed by time travelers that every timeline where the Hindenburg did not crash, then Nazi Germany won World War II. Every timeline. Why? Because it became a huge, profitable industry for Germany and infused their economy with large amounts of wealth. So these time travelers understood the Hindenburg must go down, and the era of the airship needed to at least temporarily end. After all, who would want to fly in one of these blimps that exploded so easily? So, the disaster of the Hindenburg with cameras rolling was caused by time travelers. However, a Goldilocks type of situation was the goal, with the maximum number of survivors, which we see manifesting in this timeline. I've heard stories, which I've verified to be true, that back in older times, you could actually move a ship from ocean to ocean by using St. Elmo's fire. The captain of a ship, usually pirates, would hire about 30 remote viewers as his crew, and a few more that had the ability to influence the weather related to storms and lightning. The crew of remote viewers would be given the coordinates of where the ship should be transported to. The storm bringers would invoke a lightning storm where a bolt of lightning would hit the mast, creating St. Elmo's fire. Then, boom, the entire ship would be transported from, let's say, the Pacific Ocean to the Indian Ocean, or wherever the destination coordinates that were given to the remote viewers. Now, when you take this example of a captain of a ship and see the similarity between a captain or the CEO of a business, what if, for example, you wanted to build the most amazing team of software engineers? Instead of remote viewing, there's a type of esoteric gift known as Technopathy. This is when someone with this gift can not only create amazing software, but they can do things like hack passwords just with the power of their mind. Imagine what you could create with a team of software developers that all had this gift and it was fully activated. Something to think about. Getting back to the airship, I want to interject that I personally believe the airship is coming back. There is a new type called the hybrid airship, now under construction by such companies as Lockheed Martin. They are almost zero emission and can move large cargo such as food, heavy equipment, and other supplies to places on the planet where there are no roads. They can also be used for adventure travel, for hard-to-reach places on the planet. This includes sacred sites or even snowboarding in Antarctica. The future for hybrid airships is amazing. And I also want to state that instead of using hydrogen as the fuel, which is flammable, they use helium. And helium actually extinguishes fire, so they're extremely safe. Now, here is the second Goldilocks type scenario related to the Titanic. As I was creating this act, I clearly remember that both John Astor and his newlywed wife both went down with the ship. She would not leave his side. It was both romantic and tragic at the same time. However, in this timeline, she survived and was safe aboard a lifeboat with an added surprise. She was 5 months pregnant. She later gave birth to their son, John Jacob, who went by the name Jakey. He was known as the Titanic baby. Did you know about that? Is the Titanic baby a Mandela effect for you? This allowed John Astor to maintain a DNA lineage with his unborn son, along with 2 other children from a past marriage. I know that John Astor was very favorable of that outcome. Also, in this timeline, John Astor's body is recovered with the equivalent of $60,000 in the vest pocket of his life jacket. And you can understand that if he had survived, he would have been looked down on because of his wealth and people thinking, just another rich guy getting ahead at all costs. So when given the decision of the timeline where his wife is pregnant and his son is born healthy, combined with negative timelines arising if he lived, it was an easy decision. Now, as I was putting this act together and looking into other Titanic timelines, guess who else was involved? If you say the Nazis, you are correct. For those of you that have not seen my other videos, the Nazis come up a lot, especially related to negative timeline insertions. We've been taught that the Nazis lost World War II, but that's not quite factual. The Nazis had more influence in the United States government and NASA after World War II than we can even imagine.
This is our world. And this is the alternate world we've reached. So like our own. Except the Axis lost the war. Which is why it's critical we understand it. But soon we'll reach other worlds. And more beyond that, harvesting the intelligence of world after world, defeating everyone across the multiverse.
Every door out is a door in.
And once the Nazis discovered time travel and how important the hairball of timelines surrounding the Titanic was, especially related to their rise to power in the 1930s, you can easily imagine their interest in the outcome. Let me explain. I've got some splaining to do. Before I talk about the Nazis, I also want to mention that a negative alien species known as tall whites, also tall grays, were also present at the sinking. They also had an interest to ensure that the Titanic sank. An interesting side point is that the leaked documents by Edward Snowden reveal the collaboration between the alien species known as tall whites and Nazi Germany. This is something you can look into for your own investigation. Also, the spirit of John Astor was very insistent with me about the Germans and a submarine and torpedoes. To begin, I direct your attention to those U.S. Senate hearings conducted in 1912 regarding the eyewitness testimony of the survivors of the Titanic, which I mentioned earlier. Ladies and gentlemen of the court, I now ask you to consider point number 1 regarding time-traveling Nazis. Several survivors, including both passengers and crew members, when questioned, testified before the Senate that they never felt any impact or heard any sound when the collision occurred, suggesting it was minor in nature. However, they reported having heard 4 explosions deep in the Titanic after it had scraped the iceberg. These could have been torpedoes launched by a German submarine. Torpedoes to ensure that in that timeline, the Titanic would go down. I now ask you to consider point number 2 regarding time-traveling Nazis. Survivors in lifeboats observed a searchlight in the distance, encouraging them that a rescue vessel was approaching. This light had been attributed to the Californian, but that ship's captain insisted that it was not his, that there was another vessel between his and the Titanic. Several sailors on watch insisted that they witnessed an unidentified vessel approximately 5 to 6 miles away until about 2 a.m., possibly a submarine that had surfaced to assess the damage it had caused, after which time it departed. Now, as you are aware, the Nazi Party was not in existence in 1912. Also, Germany, who 3 years later sank the Lusitania in 1915, was advanced in their U-boat technology, but not enough to go that far into the Atlantic Ocean. I want you to know, that if it wasn't for the persistent presence of the spirit of John Astor about Germans and a submarine, I most likely would have left this out. It's also interesting to note that when the Titanic finally rested on the ocean floor, the side of the boat that either struck the iceberg or was hit by torpedo is submerged in the sand and is not visible. By the way, John Astor gave me a series of 5 messages. The first message was a thank you for me telling about his story and the timelines of the Titanic. The rest were items he asked me to do or speak about, including the timeline that involved the Germans. So basically, I got a wish list from a ghost. And now, ladies and gentlemen of the court, what is your verdict? Remember that you are not deciding guilt or innocence. You simply must decide if there were enough dark truths to make the sinking of the Titanic more than we were ever told. Was there a hairball of timelines, the stuff that conspiracies, and in our case, a conspiracy cake, are made from? If you believe there is more at play here, and you have learned at least one new thing about the Titanic, then give this video a thumbs up. Thank you. Court is now adjourned. In this act, I mentioned Jakey Astor, the Titanic baby, and the son of John Astor, whose wife was pregnant with him on the Titanic. Now, we are turning our attention to even more babies. The time-traveling babies of Tartaria. Where do these time-traveling babies wind up? Why, Brooklyn, New York, of course. More specifically, Coney Island in the early 1900s. Time-traveling babies from the Tartarian Empire that arrived in Coney Island? What am I talking about? Why would babies time travel? Find out when we continue with Act 4, Time-Traveling Babies. It's not going to be what you think it is. P.S. I hope you are binge watching these videos when the Symphony of Realities acts are all completed, because I'm sure you don't like all the suspense. Regardless, until next time.